In retaliation for U.S. and Israeli strikes, Iran's navy broadcast a forbidding message: the Strait of Hormuz was closed. Up until the war, a full 20% of the world's oil passed through this single 20-mile-wide shipping lane. But the physical supply of global oil only shrank by about 8% in March 2026, yet prices spiked by a massive 60%. A global supply contraction of 8% shouldn't mathematically cause prices to jump 7.5 times that amount. To understand how a surprisingly mitigated physical disruption triggered an oversized economic crisis, we have to look at the full complexity of global oil markets. Looking at this map of the Persian Gulf, the smallest countries on the waterway, Bahrain, Qatar, and Kuwait, are positioned entirely behind the blockaded strait. Because they rely entirely on oil tankers transiting that specific route to export their product, the closure presented an almost existential threat to their economies. The rest of the region had prepared for this exact scenario. The United Arab Emirates and Iran each spent years building dedicated pipelines to bypass the strait completely, routing oil overland to the ports of Fujairah and Jask on the exterior coast. Iraq found an overland workaround as well. Using a pipeline routed through Kurdistan, they can pump up to 600,000 barrels a day directly to a port in Turkey, bypassing both the Strait of Hormuz and the heavily contested Suez Canal. And then there's Saudi Arabia. As the only Gulf country with a Red Sea coastline, they maintain a massively capable 1,200-kilometer east-west pipeline that can divert up to 5 million barrels of oil a day away from the Gulf entirely. Between the UAE, Iran, Iraq, and Saudi Arabia, these alternative pipelines acted as a formidable physical defense system. They effectively shielded the vast majority of the region's oil output from the blockade. This chart breaks down the total pre-war exports from the Gulf. When you subtract the volume of oil that was successfully diverted through those alternative pipelines, the actual gap in the market becomes clear. The total net contraction to the global oil supply ultimately landed at approximately 8%. Physical engineering largely solved the supply problem. The pipelines worked. So the true cause of the 60% price spike didn't emerge from the physical geography of the Middle East, but from the underlying math of the market itself. To understand this, we can look at this comparison chart demonstrating elasticity of demand. If you're buying a highly elastic product like breakfast cereal, a 10% increase in price will typically lead to a 30% drop in demand. Consumers will just buy a cheaper brand or eat something else. But if we add oil to the chart, the demand line acts completely differently. Oil is incredibly inelastic because internal combustion engines require it to run, and there is simply no immediate substitute. In the short term, consumption cannot easily drop. 3/4 of personal driving in the U.S. is for non-discretionary journeys, like commuting to work or picking up kids from school. Commercial trucking companies aren't going to stop moving freight either. They'll just pay more for fuel and pass the cost along. Because consumers cannot refuse to buy oil, any drop in supply forces a brutal response. Markets push prices drastically higher until it becomes completely unaffordable for enough people, forcing that tiny deficit out of the system. Academic research examining historical precedents shows that oil operates with a short-term elasticity of demand of around -0.1. This equation demonstrates how that coefficient applies to the blockade. If you take that 8% drop in supply and divide it by the -0.1 elasticity coefficient, the math yields a roughly 60% price spike. The massive jump at the pump was the cold, mechanical reality of an elastic market functioning exactly as it was designed to. But markets aren't perfect calculators. They are driven by the subjective, fallible humans known as commodity traders. Through physical purchases and futures contracts, their bets on what oil will do tomorrow act as a self-fulfilling prophecy for the price we pay today. In the opening days of the conflict, their reaction to the closure of the world's most important oil choke point was bizarrely muted. Over the first 2 days of trading following the strikes, prices only rose a modest 11%, and by Wednesday, the market was effectively flat. Traders were heavily influenced by political narrative. Initial statements from the U.S. administration implied their objective was to eliminate imminent threats, which the market interpreted as a highly limited military operation. The global market spent the opening days of the war trading on political optimism, assuming a swift resolution, rather than reacting to the physical reality of a blockaded waterway. Reality hit the market simultaneously. Almost instantly, every major marine insurance company issued cancellation notices for war risk policies across the entire Gulf, utilizing a standard clause that requires only 72 hours notice. A very large crude carrier can be worth up to $130 million, and it carries a cargo worth upward of $130 million more. Operating a $250 million asset through a missile zone without insurance is a financial risk no single company can bear independently. This bureaucratic wall functionally trapped the oil. Even with the alternative pipelines working perfectly, vessels simply could not legally or financially float out of the region to collect it. Invisible financial bureaucracy, rather than physical missiles or mines, served as the actual catalyst that woke the market up and triggered the 60% price spike. As days turned into weeks, insurers eventually started writing policies again, but the costs of war risk insurance had surged more than tenfold, establishing a massive new baseline expense for every journey. The conflict shattered a long-held financial assumption. For years, the market treated these wealthy, developed Gulf states as isolated from the broader turmoil of the Middle East. That illusion of stability is gone. Commodity traders are now permanently pricing this new vulnerability into the cost of oil. Even as the physical supply recovers, the uncertainty keeps prices hovering near $100 a barrel. Until global logistics evolve past their reliance on the Strait of Hormuz, the persistent threat of its closure guarantees the entire world will pay a permanent premium at the pump.